For my first fall pattern, I had the opportunity to sew up Colette's pattern called Rue. The fabric I chose was actually purchased in Mood Fabrics in LA, which I talk about in a previous haul video, so definitely check that out. The pattern itself is this beautiful dress that has a couple different variations. I chose to do the short sleeve just because I feel a little bit more comfortable wearing those. And the fabric, it was like butter. It was definitely this sort of fabric where it just cuts beautifully, it sews beautifully. It has this weight that kind of reminds me of the weight that Kate Spade uses in a lot of the dresses that they produce. The main visual interest in this dress is actually the tucks, the little pleats that are going to be at the bust point rather than a traditional dart. For me, I was a little bit concerned about them just because I wouldn't be able to do a full bust adjustment like I normally would. To be honest, it actually fit pretty well out of the package, though I did kind of wing a full bust adjustment as best I could on there. If I were to make this pattern again, actually I'm already planning that in a black version and maybe a red version, but for the next version I will probably be trying to do that full bust adjustment again, a little bit bigger, but this did fit pretty comfortably across the bust. What also brings some visual detail to those tucks on the bust points is piping, which is actually an optional feature of this pattern. But when I saw that it was an option, I actually jumped on it because you really don't get to use piping too much in a lot of garments generally. So I think this is a pretty good opportunity to pull that out. With this one, just a simple bias piping, and when I sewed it on there, I did make sure to baste everything as much as I could, especially since the piping was going to be placed on a curve, which is really not that hard to sew on. It can be intimidating for people who are beginners or who just don't have practice. When I first started learning how to sew, one of my original teachers actually had us sewing spirals so that we would get used to moving the sewing machine in a circle. So if you're a beginner, definitely try that out before sewing this on there, or at the very least baste everything together before you do that. So in order to sew the piping on there, definitely recommended that you use a zipper foot. Now, Colette's instructions definitely talk about using the zipper foot, but I cannot stress this enough. This will definitely help get your stitch line right up close to that piping and make sure that it lines up correctly. The last consideration when you're sewing stuff on a curve is absolutely take the time to trim and clip your seam allowances. A lot of people will not do this, and then their fabric does not lay properly after it's been pressed and ironed and seamed. So just take a couple moments, don't clip through the seam line because that will mix things up. The only thing that was actually a little bit tricky for me about this pattern, which I don't know if it was me or if it was a pattern, I can't quite figure it out, was that the side seams did not line up. I actually had to do a kind of weird trim job just to get it to line up though. In the end, everything, I kind of made it work. But I may have to go back to the original pattern versus my tracings on that. The skirt was actually pretty straightforward. There's a couple different options on there. There's a simple gathered skirt, and then there's the pleated version, which is what I ended up deciding to do. It's luckily, the print that I chose kind of gives it this really beautiful garden feeling. And with the pleats themselves, as long as you mark your fabric correctly, everything's already divided out for you, so you don't have to do any math to make those pleats. I chose to use tailor's tacks rather than putting holes in the fabric or using chalk. I find that the tailor's tacks just stay in there a lot better for me. It definitely took a little bit of practice for me to do that though, and it's worth it though. It helps in the long run. The pockets themselves definitely follow the directions and the Colette instructions. They talk about using interfacing in order to reinforce the corners. Another thing that I found that works for me with the pockets is also doing a double line of stitching at the top and bottom of the pocket. Actually in this clip I don't do that. You guys can't see it on there, but I definitely went back and reinforced the corners just so that they won't rip out. Just like at the curved at the bodice, definitely trim and notch your pockets, even though they really aren't turned out too much. It's just good practice. In this step here, I'm actually attaching the bodice to the skirt, which take your time at. If you rush it, it just sucks to have to undo the whole thing to make sure everything doesn't pucker or sit weird. The lining itself was actually pretty straightforward. This, I was actually kind of impressed with that the directions dictate, doing an entire lining. A lot of dresses will only have you line the top, or if you're doing a skirt, sometimes they'll completely skip that, but this dress is fully lined, which is awesome. It means that it won't get stuck, and you can kind of wear a bunch of different things underneath without feeling like it's rubbing up against you or grabbing you too weird. Make sure that when you attach the lining, again, notch everything. So much notching in this dress, especially with so many curved seams. And zipper insertion, that one's pretty straightforward. Look up YouTube tutorials. It's not too hard. So on the sleeves themselves, this one was actually not difficult, but it's tricky if you're doing it too fast and not paying attention. The directions actually have you trace out 4 of the same sleeves, so essentially they're kind of almost reversible, I think. So just make sure that when you do one sleeve that you take time to do the other one slowly to make sure that you know what the orientation is as for the front and the back of the sleeve. This itself actually was probably the trickiest part, so I would hold it up to the mannequin and then kind of just double check that my notches were in the correct place. With sleeves or with any actually part of the garment, it's not 1 notch towards the front and 2 notches towards the back. So if you see 2 notches on the back of a sleeve, that means that that's the back part of it. So after a lot of turning and pressing and steaming some more, I ended up hand basting everything that needed to be basted. My older machine doesn't have a stitch length long enough in order to baste, so I actually prefer to do it this way anyway as well, just because it's a little bit easier to control. So at this point, you see me actually kind of aligning my sleeve with my dress and making sure everything's sewn up properly. The lining is not tucked into this. The instructions actually have you sew in the lining separately to that shoulder seam, which, to be honest, I kind of like. It makes sure that you're not rushing things and you have full control over the entire process. So there I am, hand sewing everything. If you're going to be taking on this dress, I definitely recommend it for people who are looking for stylish classic fit, and hope you enjoy making this pattern.